Hi guys, welcome back. Welcome to my world of moving, and I'm officially on an air mattress now. So I'm like basically on the floor, but welcome to the mess of the adventure we're going on. But I'm bringing you guys with me, and I'm bringing the Lost Bookshop, and I'm super excited to bring you guys along on this adventure in the hotels. Maybe I'll read some in the van. We'll see where it'll take me, but I'm super tired. I'm super tired and living on these. You guys got to pick these up. Kroger now has them as of yesterday. Cheers. Okay, we left off page 171, chapter 23, Martha. What has you looking like the cat who got the cream? Madame Bowden asked while I dressed her bed. It kept happening. I'd be in the middle of the most mundane task, and I'd think about Henry kissing me, and my cheeks would hurt from smiling so much. Just happy, I guess, I replied. Nonsense. The only reason a woman blushes like that is a man. It's the scholar, isn't it? After the bookshop, he had taken me back to his B&B, but it turned out that it was the landlady's birthday, and the house was full to bursting with a surprise party. Maybe. He walked me home after, but I didn't invite him in. Things were still a bit new, and I took the birthday party fiasco as a sign not to rush into anything. I did kiss him goodbye, though. When I thought of that kiss, that's when my cheeks hurt the most, because it was the most romantic kiss of my life. Under a street lamp, his hands in my pocket of my coat, mine under his sweater, his lips slowly finding their way down my neck, into my collarbone. I'd never been kissed like that, with a tempting kind of tenderness, like he was telling me there was much more to come. Then that tickling sensation in my lower belly was threatening to unglue me completely. I had to focus on something mundane. Do you have anything for washing? I asked, realizing that she had been staring at me with a wicked grin on her face the entire time. I gathered up the laundry and took it down to the utility room just off the kitchen. Separating the whites from the darks, my thoughts turned to my mother. In a house full of spoiled men, we always did the housework together. That's when I would practice my sign language with her and my people reading. But she didn't like me reading her too much. She said it wasn't right for a daughter to know too much about her mother's life. I never even asked why, but when I got older, I tried to break that rule. Unlike everyone else I met, though, my mother was prepared for this kind of intrusion and kept herself guarded. There was something she was hiding from me, that was for sure, and so I began to hide things from her, too. By the time I met Shane, our relationship had become distant, and there was a different kind of silence between us. She told me I was making a mistake, that she didn't trust him, but by then it was too late. As if I was trying to prove a point or punish her or myself. I sleepwalked into my marriage like stepping out into oncoming traffic, and I had no one to blame but myself. I was setting the fire in the living room when I thought I saw a movement at the window. I immediately thought it might be Henry and rushed, then slowed to the front door. As I was opening it, I realized that Henry would never come to the front door. He always tapped on the basement window. The thought came too late. Before I had time to react, I felt the hard blow against my cheekbone, and it knocked me sideways against the wall. Shane. As I looked up, he threw a scrap of paper into the street before slamming the door shut behind him. I touched my face and felt the wetness, and then saw blood. His hard expression and clenched jaw told me everything I needed to know. He was in charge now. You must be losing your memory, Martha. What? Forgotten you're a married woman. I fucking saw you. What are you talking about? Last night, all over that guy like a slut. Is that how you repay me? Repay him? For what? I could smell the drink on him. There was no predicting what he'd do now. I began calculating the safest option. If I went with him now and took whatever punishment was coming my way, I could try and escape again, if I was still able. How was I back in this situation? He kicked my legs out of the way and walked into the hallway. Suddenly I could see a future of this careful planning, weighing up the least dangerous ways of living a life with this man. My life was reduced to surviving Shane's violence. If Mitch hadn't been with me last night when I saw him kissing you, I would have murdered that guy with my own bare hands. Henry, please don't say you didn't hurt him. I have visions of Shane attacking him on his way home last night. Henry? What the fuck sort of name is that? He grabbed my arm and tried to pull me up, but I stayed on the floor. You're my wife, Martha. You belong to me. I belong to myself, I said, tired of placating him. What did it matter anyway? Whatever I said, he would always be this angry person. I could see now that I wasn't the cause of it. I don't remember inviting you in, came a voice from behind us. Oh, Jesus, Madame Bowden. I wanted to die rather than have her see me like this, a victim. I told you already, her mother has cancer and wants her home. You damn liar, I found my voice again. How could you lie about something like that? And even if my mother was on her deathbed, I wouldn't go back there. He hesitated, but only for a moment. I'm taking you home, now. She's not a potted plant, Madame Bowden said with a sarcasm that hardly fitted the situation. She would get both of us killed. I'm not going with you, I said, scurrying backwards on the floor and shielding Madame Bowden. I didn't trust my legs to hold me upright. Shane shook his head in disbelief. You ungrateful bitch. I've given you everything. He stepped towards me and began pulling me by my hair, but I grabbed onto the banister of the stairs. Why are you doing this, Shane? Why do you want me back? We're not happy together. If we were, you wouldn't hurt me like this, I said, pointing to the blood on my face. I never asked him before, never had the courage. My voice sounded detached from my body. It must have worked because he stopped for a moment, his hand still gripped around my wrist. You pushed me, Martha? You know you do. I was the scapegoat for everything that had gone wrong in his life, so he never had to face up to anything. Even now, he was blaming me, calling me everything under the sun. I turned my head towards Madame Bowden, but she was no longer behind me. You just keep pushing. And then something did push him. Something pushed him so hard that he broke through the windows, spindles of the banister that led to the basement flat. The sound of wood breaking was like a volley of gunshots followed by a sickening thump and crack. What happened? I asked. The hallway was dark around, and I had the sudden feeling that I was alone. The silence was terrifying. I couldn't move. My vision grew blurry. Is he dead? My hand flew to cover my mouth once the words were spoken. Finally, I heard the sound of her walking stick against the floorboards. She looked down the stairwell for a long time, then turned around and asked me if I were all right. I felt as though I were in a dream. The noise of people outside told me that the world was still turning, but I felt like it had ended. I crept up behind her and looked over her shoulder. Down, 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 and there he was, splayed on the floor with one of his legs trapped underneath him at an impossible angle. The bone was sticking out of his skin. I thought I would vomit, and so I kept my hand over my mouth. Letting my eyes reach his, it became clear that his head wasn't right either. Something was wrong, but I couldn't make sense of it. I want you to get your coat and go down to the shops for me. Well, what? What are you talking about? Madame Bowden looked unnervingly calm. I'll need a round of roast for this evening and a nice bottle of that French Bouget I like. Are you serious? Have you seen what's happened? I looked back down at Shane. It was strange to have our roles reversed like this, me standing over his injured body. I looked for some glimmer of recognition in his eyes. Maybe he still was alive. But there was nothing. I began to shake all over. Martha, she repeated, placing her hand on my shoulder, I want you to leave the house and do as I ask. All will be well on your return. It's good and good now. I walked down the street unseeing. Outside, I could almost believe that it didn't happen. I'd had some kind of episode and imagined the whole thing. I did exactly as she asked. I went to the butcher and asked for a round roast. I went to the off-license and found the wine she liked. And yet, all the while, the same words swam around in my head. Had she pushed him? I walked up and down Halfpenny Lane a dozen times with the handles of my shopping bags digging into my fingertips. How could I go back in there? And what did Madame Bowden mean by all will be well? Was she calling a doctor or an ambulance? There was no sign of anything on the street. I could just leave, I thought to myself. I could just walk away now and never come back. But what about Henry? I had to get my phone and see if he was okay, and my phone was in the house. I used my keys and let myself back in. The hallway was brighter now. The flowers in the vase were in full bloom, and the broken stairway had been repaired. I left the shopping bags on the floor and forced myself to look over the edge. Shane was gone. I'm afraid your husband was pulled from the river last night. A detective was standing in front of me, his small black notebook open, pen poised. His mother had declared him missing over a week ago. Did you have any contact with him during this time, Mrs. Winter? No, I was no actress. I was still in a state of complete shock. Am I right in saying that you have been separated for some time? I nodded and bit my lips to stop them from trembling. I see. He looked past me into the hallway. And can I ask you your whereabouts on the afternoon of Thursday last? Yes, Thursday afternoon is when I do the shopping. Anyone who may have seen you? Of course, yes. I give him the names and addresses of every shop I'd gone to that day. I caught sight of myself in the hall mirror. I'd put thick makeup on my cheek, but I didn't know how long it would hold. I have to call home, let them know what happened, I said, and he mercifully closed his notebook. I shut the door firmly behind him and walked back into the living room to where she was waiting for me. I leaned against the doorframe and looked her squarely in the eye. What did you do? I didn't do anything. I simply arranged to have the matter taken care of, and I suggest you take the accusatory tone out of your voice. We've broken the law, I think. Which law? The one that says you cannot take a violent man's dead body out of your basement and place it elsewhere? I saved us both a lot of bother. It wouldn't hurt you to show some gratitude. Is this what happened to all your husbands? I shouted, no longer sure who or what I was angry at. Emotions are running high, Madame Bound said, slowly getting up from her chair. I will pretend I didn't hear that. With that, she made her way up the stairs and to her bedroom. I slumped down on the couch. Ever since that day, she had taken care of me. She had prepped my meals and encouraged me to eat when I felt I couldn't. She had reassured me that what happened to Shane was not my fault. It was an accident. Convinced me that telling the police the truth would only raise suspicion and make me a suspect with motive. We were both here, she said, patting my hand. We both know what happened. It was an accident. Yes, an accident, I kept repeating after her. We were both there. Okay, chapter 24, Henry, page 179. I thought I'd never get out of Heathrow. Travelers from every corner of the globe seemed intent on slowing me down, or perhaps I was moving with more purpose than I was accustomed to. Sitting on the tube, I thought about Isabel and what I would say when I got there. It was like thinking about an old acquaintance, not the woman I had planned on spending the rest of my life with just a few weeks ago. How had that happened? All I knew was I had to end things, and I had to do it face to face. Kissing Martha had left me without any doubts. I wrote her a letter explaining everything and left it in an envelope on the doorstep beside the milk bottles. It was too early to wake her, and besides, it was easier to pour my heart out on paper. I couldn't know what the future held, but I was clear that Isabel and I were not right for each other. Not now I'd felt the emotion I'd spent my whole life longing for yet was too scared to pursue. I heard the announcement for Pimlico and rushed up the steps of the station to street level. The streets were quieter now, with rush hour over, and the parks were playing host to parents watching their toddlers test their independence on climbing frames. I was testing something too, trusting my gut. I arrived at Denby Street, where a terraced row of highly ornate houses with balustrades on the first floor and soft yellow London stock brick on the upper two floors. I felt a churning nausea at the pit of my stomach as I rang the doorbell. A light flicked on, and I could hear the footsteps before she opened the door. Henry! She pulled me into an embrace, and I wasn't sure what to do. She wouldn't want to hug me after I told her what I'd come to say. Why didn't you say you were coming? I invited Cassie and James over for drinks. You don't mind, do you? She was a manicured vision of beauty, her silky auburn hair tucked expertly into a bun, a cream satin dress falling just so from her athletic frame. I need to speak with you, alone. My expression was unmistakable. What is it? Is everything okay? I was still on the doorstep. Christ, my whole life seemed to be lived on the doorstep, never fully in or out, never feeling as though I belonged anywhere. She pulled the door behind her and stepped outside. You'll get cold, I said. It doesn't matter. I have a feeling this conversation won't take very long. I looked up at her. She was always more intuitive than me. She was the smartest woman I'd ever met. There was no point trying to find the right words because they simply did not exist. You're an amazing woman. Oh, God. What? Anything but the "it's not you, it's me" speech. It's humiliating, Henry. But it's true. It's me. I'm the problem. I know that. So why are you leaving me? Fuck. This was why people lied. It's far easier to lie to someone than to watch them bear the hurt of your careless words. Because I thought I knew what love was. I thought it was something I could manage. You and I, we knew how to rub along together. We had a good partnership. But if you're honest, I know you'll think the same thing. We weren't. I searched the sky for inspiration. Fireworks. Wow. She wiped a stray tear from her eye. You must have had your doubts too, Izzy. Stupidly, I thought she would agree with me. Don't expect me to make this easier for you, Henry. You see, the thing is, I do love you very much. As it happens, and I thought we had fireworks. I felt 10 stone heavier. Her arms were folded tightly around her. What could I say to make it better? I'm so sorry, Isabel. I truly am. She said nothing, wouldn't even meet my eyes. I feel terrible, I said. You feel terrible? Try being dumped on the doorstep by your fiancé before we even had a chance to pick out a ring. This must be some kind of record. Nothing I said was coming out right. You're better off without me. Finally, something we can agree on. With that, she walked back inside and slammed the door in my face. I buried my face in my hands and hardly noticed when the door opened again. And here is all your shit, she said, handing me a black plastic bag. I hope she's worth it. The door slammed again. It was late by the time I returned home. There was scaffolding on the house next door, which, in the evening sunlight, made it look as though it were trapped in a gilded cage. I walked up our driveway and noticed an e-bike parked where my mother's old VW Golf used to be. I turned my key in the door and was hit by the welcome scent of a roast chicken, giving me an appetite for food that I thought I would never have again. Not after talking to Isabel. I never felt more unsure of who I was, and that was saying something, for a man who lived his entire life in the shadow of other people's opinions. I felt empty. Henry, my mother exclaimed from the kitchen, rushing into the hallway. She held me in a tight embrace, and I found myself absently wondering why she was wearing a long white shirt covered in paint and a bandana in her hair. She was normally a pearls and twins set type of person, keeping up the illusion that we still had money and that my father had not drunk it all. You look different, I said. I've taken up life drawing. Annie next door goes to a class every Thursday, and it's just so they can perv up young naked models, came the unmistakable monotone voice of my sister. She and her husband Neil thumped their heavy Doc Marten boots coming down the stairs. Oh, Lucinda, honestly, my mother cried, rolling her eyes in mock offense. My sister's eyes were rimmed with black liner, and while her jet black hair reached almost to her lower back, she had cut her fringe in a very definite, hard line that gave her a stern look. We all made an obstacle course out of getting ourselves from the hall into the kitchen. It was awkward but familiar, and I was glad of that. Why didn't you say you were coming home? A phone call would have been nice, Mom said, putting on some oven gloves and bending down to take out the chicken and roast potatoes. I set the table while Lucinda and Neil carried on kissing each other as though we weren't there. It was a last-minute thing. A surprise for Isabel? I let the sound of plates and cutlery drown out whatever useless response I was attempting to conjure to that. Isabel and I were a mistake, I said eventually, having realized this was for the first time. We both knew. It's better this way. There, no room for debate. My mother stood like a statue for a moment, her mouth shaped in an O. You young people today, my sister said, punching my arm and slightly rescuing the situation. Gosh, you are incredibly pregnant, I said, noticing the size of her bump. Yep, she really ballooned out these last couple of weeks, Neil agreed, earning himself a kick on the shin. I'm not due for another fortnight, she groaned, but it looked as though Neil was the one suffering. Over dinner, I listened as they chatted animately about plans for the future, and I realized that during my short absence, things had changed at home, and for the better. My mother had become something of an eco-warrior / militant cyclist, and Lucinda seemed, well, happy. So what was Ireland like? Neil asked, his dark eyes peeping through a heavily back-combed mop of hair. Lou said you were researching an old bookshop. Sounds cool. I finished my last leg of wine before answering. It's proving elusive, but I may have found something else of interest, I said, the smile forming on my lips. What? My mother said, cutting the Viennetta into slices at the worktop. She loved a classic dessert. I met someone in Ireland. I'm going back as soon as I can. I can get a flight. All of their faces turned towards me. I couldn't quite believe I'd said it, but that's how certain I was. Are you seriously leaving the country so you won't have to change a nappy? My sister asked, slack-jawed. Bit extreme, mate, Neil chimed in. Mother cut another chunk of Viennetta. She decided this was the subject she alone should tackle. Henry, sweetheart, I know you were something of a late developer, but I don't want you turning into some kind of Lothario. I couldn't help but laugh, if only she knew. So you just came back to see Isabel? What about Dad? Lucinda had always been his champion. She'd somehow managed to miss the worst of his drinking, and he'd never taken his moods out on her. What about him? Aren't you going to visit him? He's been asking about you. You've seen him? Of course, she said, then flashed a look at my mother. You too? I asked. She shook her head. No, I'm moving on with my life. I have to put my own needs first now. You are both grown-ups and can make your own decisions. He'll always be your father, Henry, but it's up to you. If it had been up to me, he would have never been a father. It was never up to me. It was up to him. Chapter 25, Opaline, England, 1922. I awoke the next morning to the sound of a milk truck making deliveries. The daylight had barely begun to breach the dusky pink curtains, but I could make out the line of his shoulder and his dark mop of hair on the pillow. Armand slept so soundly it made me question my constant self-doubt. I doubted myself, my choices, my desires, and my abilities all of the time. Oh, to be a man who is always sure of himself, and sure of this place in the world. In becoming Miss Grey, I wasn't just hiding from Lyndon, I was hiding from everything and everyone, all of the expectations of my gender to be all of the things I no longer was. Pure, timid, and passive. I wish we were still in Paris, where being ordinary was frowned upon and breaking the rules was a rite of passage. I hadn't slept well, or at all really. I found my thoughts returning to Matthew. He had visited the shop briefly before I left. I think he was embarrassed by what had happened, how we had held each other that night. I imagine he would not have come at all if he did not need to collect the rent, but his good manners precluded him from having a purely transactional visit, and so he began to speak about the shop and his childhood dreams to become a magician. A magician? I echoed in disbelief, as if to prove his point. He reached behind my ear and found a small glass ball. I reached out to take it from his palm, yet somehow it had disappeared into thin air. Hold on. This is really bothering me. Okay. How did you do that? I said, smiling brightly. Ah, now that would be telling. If only I could have made my feelings disappear so easily. On the days he came, everything was brighter, sunnier, happier. But when he left to return to his family, I felt wretched. Maud Opally, Armand whispered, nuzzling into my neck. I let him put his arms around me, chasing the loneliness away. I hadn't intended to come back to his rooms, but I suppose from the minute we set eyes on each other in Yorkshire, it was inevitable. Yet I couldn't help thinking that I held no place in his heart above any of the other women he bedded. Well, I wasn't going to let him think that I cared for him either. That way I wouldn't get hurt. The reasoning of an idiot, but love, as they say, is blind. I must go, I said, eventually kissing him lightly on his cheek. My non-rest? I cannot. My boat leaves this evening, and I have some business to attend to before then. Business? He propped himself up on his elbow and watched me dress. God, he was gorgeous. An Adonis. I had to turn my back on him while buttoning up my blouse. A book. Of course it's a book. Tell me. I turned to look at him. Yes, he was beautiful, and yes, he was a valuable connection in the book-dealing world. He had also helped me to escape Paris. Yet, as I had realized in Sotheby's, he was cut from the same cloth as Rosenbach. Ruthless, single-minded, and greedy. When it came to books, perhaps I was too, because in that moment I realized that while there may be honor amongst thieves, the same could not be said for book dealers. Perhaps I can stay a little longer, I said, kneeling on the bed beside him and letting him unbutton my blouse again. Loneliness is not a discerning bedfellow. In fact, the more inappropriate the company, the more it suited my fatalistic outlook when it came to love. Something told me I would never find it, so why bother saving myself for it? I didn't have much time. My ears echoed with the sound of my heels rushing along the pavement as I scanned the numbers on the door. My search had led me to Soho and a small warren of alleyways tucked behind Regent Street. I stayed true to my word and told Armand nothing of my detective work regarding Emily Bronte's second novel. I made a decision that morning that I would stand by for the rest of my life. The work would always come first. However, I did ask him to suggest a dealer who might be familiar with bookshops that were no longer trading. Having spent an interesting morning in Mayfair, I was given the address of Brown's Bookshop. It was now a solicitor's office, but I was reliably informed that the previous owners retained the flat above the shop. I knocked on the door for quite some time before a middle-aged woman dressed all in black answered. "Mrs. Brown?" I hazarded a guess. "Yes," she replied, raising her head slightly to peer through the glasses that were sliding down her nose. "Do I know you?" "No, we are not acquainted, and I'm sorry to bother you, but I was hoping to speak to your husband. It's concerning his bookshop and his Aunt Martha Brown." She smiled in a sorrowful way. "Oh, we haven't had one of these for a while, have we, Reginald?" There was no one there, but I assumed Reginald was upstairs as she looked skywards. "One of what? A Bronte fan?" "Do come in," she invited as it had begun to drizzle slightly. We climbed the stairs and came to a pretty little parlor room facing the street below. Every surface was covered with lace doilies, but there wasn't a book in sight. It was not a good start. I took the seat she offered me at a small round table in front of the fire. "We shall have tea," she called out again to some invisible person. Within minutes, a young girl with sullen features carried in a tray with cups and saucers and a silver teapot. "Thank you," I said, but received no response. "Well, she might look vexed. I will have to terminate her employment and go live with my sister in Cornwall. I simply cannot afford to live here any longer," Mrs. Brown pointed out sadly. Once a polite amount of time had passed, I inquired about Mr. Brown and whether or not I could speak with him. "Oh, but, my dear, you are a fortnight too late. My dearest Reginald passed away in that very chair," she said, pointing to an armchair in the corner. "Hence the move to my sister's." "I see," I said, ruining my terrible timing. "I am very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Brown, and I won't take up any more of your time with my silly detective work." She bade me stay a little longer, at least until the rain eased up, as it had now turned into a torrential downpour. Besides, I don't get to talk very much about our old bookshop anymore. I used to enjoy working there. "Might I ask what happened to the stock? Did you sell everything?" "Everything that would interest one such as yourself, I'm afraid." "Oh, there were many dealers back then, keen to get their hands on anything related to the Bronte family. Even a book of birds belonging to the family," she cooed. "I mean, honestly, there comes a point where you have to draw a line." She had no idea who she was talking to. When it came to book scouts, there was no line. Anything that might relate to an author or their life was of interest. Besides, if I had anything left to sell now, I would be only too happy to part with it. I will need all the funds I can muster at my age. Life was difficult for a woman on her own. I could appreciate that. I told her about my shop in Dublin, and as pathetic as it may sound, I reveled in her praise of my independence. "But now I really must go reluctantly, Mrs. Brown," I said, realizing the time. I had to get the train back to Liverpool for the evening's sailing. "Oh, I am sorry. You've come all this way hoping to find something, and I have been of no help," she said, struggling up from her seat to see me out. "Wait a minute. Perhaps I do have something you might fancy," she said, disappearing into another room. When she returned, she was carrying what looked like a little tin box. "We had it in the bookshop, but it never sold," she said, handing it to me. "What is it?" "An old sewing box belonging to Charlotte." My eyes widened. I couldn't believe I was holding one of her humble yet personal possessions in my hands, something she would have used daily. I lifted the lid, which revealed a neat row of threads in dark hues and an embroidered pincushion with needles lodged snugly in it. According to my husband, who of course got it from Martha herself, it was Branwell who gifted it to Charlotte. Although Lord knows it wasn't much of a gift. He was fond of the odd tipple, that one. I knew from my research that was fond of quite a bit more, having struggled with both alcohol and drug addiction during his lifetime. I often wondered if Hindley Earnshaw's chaotic descent into gambling and addiction in Wuthering Heights was based on Branwell, who often suffered delirium tremens while attempting to sober up. £2 and it's yours, she said. In any other situation, I would have required proof of the provenance of such an item, but I decided to take it on faith. Besides, I saw how amusing it would be if, in fact, she were a swindler, selling me her own sewing box and passing it off as a Bronte collectible. I handed her the money, which she said would go towards her retirement pot, and I set out on my journey back home to the anonymity of Dublin. Perhaps it was hypervigilance on my part, but in London, I could not shake the sickening sense of being watched. It had been 3 months since my trip to England, and even though I had not expected to hear from Armand, having my thoughts confirmed by the postman every morning was a little stinging. Still, I found a sense of fulfillment in my achievements and the success of my wonderful little shop, which, despite the growing number of books I stocked it with, seemed to find room to accommodate them. I had long suspected that something just beyond my comprehension was afoot, as though Mr. Fitzpatrick had put a spell over the place. At night, when sleep stole away from me like a vanishing point, I'd make some cocoa and sit on the floor of the shop, wrapped in a blanket. I was immediately soothed by that breathing sound I had heard since I was a child, the story settling between the pages. Only now I could hear another sound. I shuffled over to one of the walls and, feeling a little foolish, put my ear to it. A soft creaking like the boughs of a tree bending slightly in the breeze. I smiled to myself and often fell asleep like that, cradled in the corner of the dark green walls, wooden shelves with fluttering book leaves shimmering overhead. When I awoke, it was still dawn and a peach light filtered through the windows. I'd had the most vivid dream, the kind that leaves you drenched in a feeling you can't quite grasp the meaning behind. My father was listening to the books and smiling, telling me to listen. I held one in my ear and heard a heartbeat, then two, the second one lighter, quicker. And like an apple falling to the ground, understanding came to me all at once. I placed my hand on my stomach and felt a kick. I had not had my monthly courses since my return home, and had put it down to traveling or anything other than what it truly was. No, I felt the curve of my belly. It was real. A tear rolled down my cheek. This will not be easy, I whispered to myself or the shop. I wasn't sure which, but I could not deny the joy that bubbled up inside of me. A baby. A baby. Conflicting emotions rushed through me all at once. Fear, excitement, anxiety, gratitude. I felt too young, too incapable of becoming a mother, but I simultaneously relished the idea of having a family of my own. I completely lost track of time as I idealized a very different future for myself. I opened the shop quite late that day, but it felt as though it were the first day of my life. Everything was gilded in optimism and grounded in meaning. I saw each customer as the child they once were or the parent they would become. I saw us as all being connected, a universal family. And in the quieter moments, I pictured the life growing inside of me like a little rosebud, an unparalleled beauty that would make the world a brighter place merely by her presence in it. It was only when night fell that my glowing heart began to doubt itself. Reality crossed my threshold in the form of Matthew coming to collect the rent. I had to tell him. In another month or so, he would see for himself. In another 6 months, there would be 2 of us living here. It all suddenly felt quite weighty. What would he think of me now? I wish the shop could close in around us and keep us safe, keep the world outside. I wish we could hide within these walls forever. It's getting good. I knew it would. But we left off on page 193, chapter 26, Martha. I think like basically halfway. Yeah. So, leave down below if you're watching this. Don't be afraid to comment what you think is going to happen. Like what... There's so many ways that this book can go, but... But thank you guys for being here again, and thank you for being patient. There may be days I cannot read. Don't go on without me, though. Please wait for me. But anyway, I hope you guys are having a good week. It's very busy. As you can tell, my eyes are, I'm just tired. I'm just barely alive right now. But anyway, guys, I'll keep you updated along the way. And check my post if I make community post. And I'll update you. It's going to be a few days. But yeah. I also started recording this morning, like a little vlog I'm gonna kind of piece together every few days, I think. But anyway, thanks again for being here, guys, and I will see you soon. Bye.